The story begins with a man getting angry at someone who suggested cutting open his father's stomach to perform surgery. He refused to let such a barbaric thing happen. A woman then explained that the symptoms the older man showed were signs of ileus. She warned that if it was left untreated, it could cause the intestines to die, lead to a serious infection called peritonitis, and in the worst case, cause death. The man argued that they could not trust anyone without magic. He insisted that they should just improve his father's monoflow to ease the pain instead. The woman grabbed him by the collar and told him to stop making excuses and actually look at the patient. She said this was not something that could be fixed just by removing the pain. If his eyes were so useless, she added, they might as well be taken out and put in a jar for display. The man was left speechless. He glanced at his father, who was groaning in pain, then sank to the floor and asked who would ever agree to perform surgery on his father. He had never even heard of someone cutting open the stomach before. The woman calmly tied her hair back and said she would be the one to do it. She introduced herself as Kiara Bellworth and swore that she would save the sick man in front of her no matter what it took. Some time ago in modern-day Japan, an argument broke out inside an operating room. A woman pointed out that the surgeon in charge was not skilled enough, and that at his current pace the patient could die. Kirihara Akira, another surgeon, told everyone to step aside so she could take over. The male surgeon did not care whether Akira was a talented surgeon or not. He warned her not to overestimate herself and told her to leave since he was already handling the case. Akira could not believe such an unqualified doctor was treating a patient like an object. She told him the patient was bleeding and that he was wasting precious time. She pointed out how inexperienced he was and told him to step aside if he did not want to embarrass himself further. The male surgeon said she would regret it and walked out. Akira took a deep breath, composed herself, and began the operation. After the surgery, Akira was called by her superior, who told her to leave the hospital. She asked for a clear reason. The superior reminded her that she had removed Dr. Yamada from his own operating room and had spoken to him harshly. Akira explained that the patient had been in critical condition, and that Yamada had acted amateurishly throughout the procedure, so she had stepped in. The superior said that was not the main problem. He told her that Dr. Yamada's father, a well-known university director, was furious. He had threatened to hold the medical department's leaders responsible for insulting his son unless Akira was punished. Akira did not care who Yamada's father was, as she believed she had made the right choice to save a patient's life. However, her superior told her that her actions had now put everyone's career at risk. In the end, he said it was best for her to leave. He ordered her to pack her things and go. When Akira left, people started talking behind her back. They said that even the best surgeon could not stand up to power. Many believed she deserved what happened because she often interfered with other doctors' patients. They thought she was acting too proud just because she was good at surgery. Akira shot a sharp look at them before walking away, left completely on her own. In her mind, she believed she had only done what she thought was right. When she got home, she opened a can of beer and grumbled about how those people did not even have the courage to say anything to her face. She could not believe that Dr. Yamada refused to admit his lack of skill, and instead went crying to his father. She also could not believe her own superior gave in so easily. In her view, they were only worried about the next election for the hospital director. For the moment, she decided to push the matter aside and relax with a book later. As she picked up her phone, she came across a shoujo manga titled Cinderella's Engagement. It told the story of Kiara, a noblewoman mistreated by her own family, who faced one trial after another while slowly growing closer to the prince. Akira knew stories like this were very popular lately, but she had rarely read any manga herself. Soon after, she became absorbed in what she was reading and yelled at her phone, saying they should have stopped the bleeding already instead of crying. She could not believe they were just standing there, not even calling for a doctor. She also did not understand why they were not using their healing magic, which seemed so convenient, and instead spent their time chatting. She knew the patient was going to die if they kept wasting time. She complained that too many characters in this manga ended up dying. Even worse, the main character only cried instead of helping. The protagonist, Kiara, was the eldest daughter of a count's family that had produced skilled magicians for generations. However, Kiara was born without any magic. Because of this, her stepmother and half-sister treated her badly. Kiara endured it all, hoping marriage would finally set her free, but her hopes were crushed when her fiancé was taken by her half-sister. Misfortune after misfortune followed her until she met the prince, and a connection slowly began to grow between them. Still, the main characters died without mercy. The dark and emotional plot was said to be the reason for the manga's popularity, but Akira did not like it at all. The protagonist kept crying while the people protecting her died one after another. Akira felt that the protagonist was just like her. She too had cried for her father's death and apologized over and over, but Akira thought that if she were the protagonist, she would save everyone. However, she also knew that if a surgeon like herself ended up in a world without X-rays or CT scans, it would be terrible news. She had no intention of indulging in such impossible fantasies. As she decided to sleep, a sudden wave of dizziness and pain hit her. She groaned and held the back of her head, feeling as if it was splitting apart. She tried to grab her phone to call an ambulance, but before she could, her consciousness slipped away. After some time, Akira finally woke up. She cried out in pain, but then realized the pain had stopped. She wondered if she had just gone through a subarachnoid hemorrhage. She planned to call an ambulance, but froze in confusion. Looking around, she wondered if she had somehow ended up in another country. The room was far too big and richly decorated for what she was used to. She thought she might have gone insane, but the headache was gone, and there were no signs of paralysis or any other problems with her body. She walked around, thinking there should be nothing wrong with her brain. Then she stopped in front of a mirror. She did not want to believe it, but somehow she had turned into Kiara Bellworth from the manga Cinderella engagement. Soon after, Kiara was served tea, and she thanked the maid named Anna. At that moment, Akira realized she was not dreaming. She had truly become Kiara Bellworth. Even more surprising, she still had all of Kiara's memories. She could clearly remember the entire family structure and even the maid's name, something she should not have known as Kirihara Akira. She wondered if her situation was like those reincarnation stories she had read in manga. Maybe her soul had entered Kiara's body, or perhaps Kiara had imagined her as a fictional person in her own mind. However, the events in the hospital felt far too strange to be just a dream. More importantly, Akira still had her medical knowledge from her past life, which proved that she was not imagining things. She told herself that sitting around would not help. She needed to focus on what was happening now. If her memory was correct, there was supposed to be a ball hosted by the Duchess later. This was the event where Kiara would secretly meet the prince and begin to develop feelings for him. But Kiara already had a fiancé, so she gave up on those feelings. Not long after, her father died in an accident, which began a chain of events that ruined her life. Her stepmother took control of the Bellworth family, and her fiancé was stolen by her younger sister. With her position in the family gone, Kiara was eventually treated like a servant. Later on, she and the prince grew close again, but jealousy from others made her a constant target, causing her endless suffering. Akira had only read up to that point in the story and did not know what would happen afterward. In a world full of dramatic twists and mystery, she doubted it would end happily. She had no desire to get caught in any more trouble. If she was going to live as Kiara, she wanted to avoid all the tragedies and live a quiet, peaceful life. That meant she had to make sure she never met the prince, no matter what. Unfortunately, the ball was still going to happen later. Just then, the door opened and a girl stepped inside, calling for her older sister. She asked if Kiara was feeling all right. She was worried because Kiara had not come down for breakfast and wondered if she was still sick. Kiara answered that she was already fine. The girl was her half-sister, Federica. Unlike Kiara, Federica had a natural talent for magic. Federica told her not to push herself too much and suggested skipping the party that evening. She said she would inform Richard, his fiancé, about it and even offered to attend the ball in her place. On the outside, Federica seemed kind, but she often did things like this to cause trouble for Kiara. She even leaned in close and whispered that Richard had called her the belle of the ball. She added that Kiara's fiancé sure knew how to charm people with his words. Instead of feeling upset, Kiara was actually pleased. She was happy that Federica could go in her place, which clearly surprised her younger sister. Kiara then pretended to be in pain and groaned about how she was not feeling well. She kept up the act and insisted she could not make it to the party. Federica seemed caught off guard. Kiara then gently pushed her out of the room, saying she would rest and wishing Federica and Richard a wonderful evening together. With that, Kiara had already solved the first problem of meeting the prince. The next challenge was stopping her father's death. In the original story, this was only mentioned in a few short lines. Kiara's father Bruno died when his carriage suddenly went out of control. This time, she only needed to keep her father from riding a carriage on that specific day. The problem was, she had no idea how to do it. Burning the carriage would be too dangerous, and she would never hurt the horses. With so many servants around, she could not pull off anything suspicious without being caught. As she stared out the window, her eyes fell on the nearby horse barn. That gave her an idea, something she could manage in just a few minutes. Not long after, the Count was stunned to find his carriage filled with hay and horse manure. Frustrated, he complained about being late for an important meeting. An attendant explained that they could prepare another carriage, but only for his return trip. With no other choice, the Count decided to walk. Before leaving, he ordered the carriage to be cleaned by the end of the day. The maids were shocked that someone had dared to tamper with the Count's carriage. They wondered if they should tell the Madame and Federica. They could not find Kiara anywhere and doubted she was hiding in her room as usual. In truth, Kiara had slipped out quietly. She followed her father from a distance, making sure everything went according to her plan. In the end, the Count reached his destination safely. Kiara no longer had to worry about her father's accident. Soon after, a few men nearby began talking about a carriage they had seen on another street. They said it was in terrible shape and thought someone might have died. Hearing this, Kiara hurried past them feeling foolish. She realized she had only focused on her father's carriage and never thought there could be another reason for the accident. She might have stopped her father from getting hurt, but someone else might have been harmed instead. She rushed to the scene and saw a carriage lying on its side. She told people to step aside, saying she was a doctor and would check the injured, but a man there said no one was hurt and told her to look closely. The carriage was already being lifted back onto its wheels. The man explained that it had hit a cart while trying to avoid a child who had run into the road. The crash did flip the carriage, but no one had died or been badly injured. Kiara felt relieved. At that moment, the child's mother began scolding him for running into the street. The boy said he had only been trying to save a cat. His mother kept scolding him, telling him he had caused too much trouble for everyone. Suddenly, a man stepped in and told the mother not to be too hard on her son. He explained that the boy might have been frightened as well. The woman called him Lord Cecil and apologized on her son's behalf. She said she was sorry for making his carriage crash and for the injury on his face. Cecil replied that it was only a small scratch. He said the damage to the carriage was minor, the horses were unharmed, and there was no need for her to worry. Kiara was surprised to see the owner of the carriage staying calm about the whole situation. When she looked more closely, she realized this man was Prince Cecil. She wondered why the prince was here. It suddenly struck her that the person in the accident was the prince himself, and this event had never happened in the original story. One of Cecil's attendants came forward and reported that arrangements had been made to recover the damaged carriage. He suggested they continue the journey using a hired one instead. Cecil thanked him for taking care of the matter, but then noticed the attendant breathing heavily. Concerned, Cecil asked if he was all right. The attendant said he was fine, but admitted that he had hit his chest when he fell. At first, he said it only hurt a little, but soon he began groaning in pain. Cecil told him not to push himself and decided they would have a healer examine him later. The mother then spoke again and apologized. She explained that she had been a widow for a long time and could not pay a large amount of money right away. Cecil reassured her that she did not need to worry about the repair costs. Kiara then understood that the prince had been caught in the accident while traveling in secret. She felt guilty that they had been the cause of the trouble, but she also knew she needed to leave as soon as possible. Just then, Cecil asked his attendant Cliff what was wrong. Cliff, holding his chest, said it was getting harder to breathe. Cecil told him to wait because they were going to the medical center immediately. He did not care how it happened, so he told another attendant to prepare a carriage right away. Kiara kept watching. She had already gone out of her way to avoid the prince. In this world, magic was combined with medicine. Instead of doctors, people relied on healers to take care of everyone's health. Compared to them, Kiara had no magic at all. Earlier, she had tried to step in without thinking, but she doubted anyone would take her seriously. In a place where healing magic could fix almost anything, there was no role for a former doctor like her. Still, her conscience could not let her stay silent. She asked everyone to stop and introduced herself as a doctor. Then, she requested to examine the attendant immediately. The prince, looking puzzled, asked if she was really a doctor. Kiara pushed him aside and began unbuttoning Cliff's clothes. She checked his pulse and looked at his neck. She noticed that his carotid artery was swelling with each beat. His pulse seemed normal, but his breathing was fast and shallow. She leaned close to his chest, listening carefully, and pressed down several times. The others watched with worry, unsure of what she was doing. Kiara saw that his chest was rising unevenly. The sound of breathing was weaker on the right side, and when she tapped his chest, it gave a dull sound. She realized she had been wrong at first. Cliff had a pneumothorax. The prince looked even more confused, not understanding the term. Kiara explained in simple words that Cliff had a hole in his lung, and air was leaking into the space around it. The air was pressing against his lungs, making it harder for him to breathe. She remembered hearing that Cliff had fallen on his chest when the carriage overturned. She guessed that a broken rib had pierced his lung. He could still breathe on his own for now, but if the air kept building up inside his chest, the pressure would crush his lungs and heart. If that happened, he would surely die. The others still looked lost, not knowing what she meant. Kiara understood that people in this world would not recognize such medical problems. Her words made the prince think deeply. He recalled once seeing a soldier who had been shot in the chest. The soldier's breathing became worse and worse until he finally died. Kiara explained that this case was similar. She was relieved that the prince understood so quickly. Realizing how serious the situation was, Cecil said he was willing to pay any amount to save his trusted attendant. Another attendant suggested sealing the hole in the lung with healing magic. Kiara then admitted she could not use healing magic because she had no magic power. Everyone around her was surprised, as they had never heard of a healer without magic. Even the bystanders found it hard to believe that people without magic still existed. The prince then asked if she was not actually a healer. Kiara clarified that she was not one, but she did have proper medical knowledge. One attendant dismissed her, saying they could not trust her, and advised the prince to take Cliff immediately to the medical center. Kiara reminded them how long it would take to travel there. The attendant told her to keep quiet, calling her a fake doctor. The insult angered Kiara. She could not believe she was being called a quack. She warned him that if he insulted her again, she would sew his rude mouth shut. She also pointed out that taking Cliff to the medical center made no sense when his condition was getting worse by the minute. She doubted he could survive the journey. She urged them to stop being naive. Besides, she explained, healing magic would not work for Cliff because too much air had already built up inside his chest. She needed to release the air first. Just then, Cliff groaned in pain and Kiara noticed his breathing becoming even weaker. After thinking for a moment, Cecil asked if Kiara could really remove the trapped air from Cliff's chest. Kiara said she could, but she needed the right tools. Cecil then remembered something from the past. A soldier had once taken a bullet while protecting him. Cecil had asked a healer to treat the man. The healer said he had already closed the wound and claimed that if the soldier's breathing did not improve, it was his own fault. The prince could not believe the healer was blaming the patient. The healer insisted that the visible injuries were already healed and asked what else could be done beyond that. This memory made Cecil decide to trust Kiara. He asked if she could truly save Cliff. Kiara replied that she would do whatever she could. Cecil promised to find the tools she needed. One of the attendants tried to stop him, but Cecil explained that he had once seen a soldier with the same type of injury. Even though healing magic had closed the wound, the man still died. What Kiara was saying made sense to him, so if she had the knowledge, he would believe in her. Kiara looked moved. She said there was not much time left and explained that she would start with a chest puncture. She described how she would insert a needle into Cliff's chest to release the air trapped inside. However, she did not have a syringe, so she needed something that could work as a replacement. Just then, she noticed a nearby shop and told the prince to get a long, narrow-tipped pipe. She also told the remaining attendant to bring her strong liquor and a long, thin knife. Cecil instructed Royce, the other attendant, to follow her orders. Others nearby also wanted to help. Soon, everyone began moving. Afterward, they only hoped it would work. Kiara took a steel pipe and broke it in half. She grabbed a liquor bottle and poured some of it over the knives. She also poured some into her hands. She told the men to hold down the patient's arms so she could start the puncture. The procedure itself was not supposed to be complicated, but doing it without proper tools, clean conditions, or medical equipment was something Kiara had never done before. Still, there was no time to stop. She aimed to make a cut above the third rib, but as soon as the knife touched the skin, Cliff groaned in pain. Kiara then inserted the pipe into the opening. The others watched as air began escaping through the pipe with a faint sound. Cliff's breathing slowly returned to normal. Everyone was shocked that it had worked. Kiara reminded them this was only first aid and that Cliff was still in danger. She told them to make sure the pipe did not move out of place, then help load him into the carriage. They chose to leave right away. Cecil tried to ask Kiara to come with them, but she had already disappeared from sight. The prince was left puzzled. Kiara managed to escape from the scene. She had given the patient first aid, but with his broken ribs there was a strong chance of internal bleeding in his chest, which could have led to hemothorax. On top of that, what she had done might have caused an infection. She thought of herself as terrible for leaving the patient like that. Still, she believed it was the right choice, especially since she was trying to avoid the prince. If she had stayed any longer, the prince would have recognized her, and that could have ended in disaster. At least she had managed to avoid her father's possible death. Afterwards, she began to feel hungry and decided to head to the kitchen. On her way, she came across Richard flirting with her younger sister. When Richard noticed her, he greeted her, saying it had been a while and asked if she was feeling better. Kiara apologized for not going with him the other day and asked why he was with Federica. Richard explained that Federica's hair ornament had fallen into his carriage when they returned from the ball, so he had stopped by to return it to her. However, Kiara knew Federica had left it there on purpose so Richard would have a reason to visit. What made it worse was that Richard did not even greet his own fiancée before going to see her sister. This only proved to Kiara that he had feelings for Federica. She pointed out that Richard did not have to come all the way himself. Richard took her words as if she was telling him to send it through a servant. He said that sounded like something she would do. Then he complained that women nowadays were trying to make their own way in society. He even brought up how Federica's grades at the academy were so high that all the male students felt embarrassed. And yet, in his eyes, Kiara spent her days doing nothing but staying inside her room. He told her to learn from her sister and work harder to be independent. Kiara tried to say something, but Richard excused himself before she could. Her stepmother then appeared, praising Richard for having such forward-thinking ideas. She said their family's future would be secure if he married into it. Federica called Kiara lucky to be engaged to such a wonderful man and teasingly told her to at least try to be more likable. Kiara excused herself, her voice trembling. Kiara was relieved that part of the situation was unfolding just like it did in the manga. In the story, Richard had believed Federica's lies about Kiara mistreating the family and servants, and he had been the one to call off their engagement. Now that Kiara had managed to stop her father from dying, neither Federica nor her mother could do whatever they wanted anymore. Kiara had no plans to marry Richard, but she knew that if she was thrown out of the house, she might end up dying on the streets. For now, she needed to act as if she knew nothing and find a way to end the engagement without causing trouble. She still did not understand why she had ended up in this world, but she was certain she would not simply accept everything without a fight. 2 weeks passed, and Kiara still had no clear plan. One day she found herself attending a public event. At a grand ball, Count and Countess Felsen greeted her warmly. Kiara thanked them for the invitation. They told her not to be so formal since they were practically family. They were Richard's parents, and the party was being held at the Felsen estate, his home. Kiara knew that if she tried to end the engagement during this event, they would do everything they could to stop her. The couple soon noticed that their son was nowhere to be found and were surprised that he had left his fiancée alone. Kiara calmly explained that Richard had gone to meet his friends. She could not tell them that he had actually left her to be with Federica. Since Richard had not spoken to them yet, Kiara offered to look for him so they could greet everyone together later. Richard's parents quietly wondered if Kiara had always been this confident. Kiara walked away on her own. She disliked these gatherings, not because she lacked friends, but because she found them tiring. She decided she would take a walk around the venue, pretend to have a headache, and then head home early. Just then, she overheard some guests talking about the prince who had recently returned from studying abroad. One girl said she had never heard anything about him making official appearances. Another girl shared a rumor that the prince had been quietly visiting different places to learn about the country's current situation. They mentioned hearing that he had attended another ball and expected him to be at this one as well. Kiara felt a wave of annoyance at their giggling. She knew that as long as she moved in high society, there was always a chance she might cross paths with the prince. Before she could think of a way to leave, Richard suddenly called out to her in a loud voice. He appeared with Federica beside him and declared that he had decided to end their engagement. Kiara, along with the rest of the guests, was left shocked. Richard announced that he had heard everything from Federica, who told him that Kiara had been mistreating her and her mother. When Kiara asked what he meant, Richard told her not to pretend to be innocent. He said that the servants of the Bellworth household had confirmed she had treated her sister like a servant and even insulted her with cruel words. He said he could not tolerate it any longer. Federica then began to cry, saying that she had been called a useless freeloader by her own sister, and that Kiara had insulted their mother for not being able to give birth to a male heir. Kiara tried to explain that she had never said such things, but Federica cried even harder. She claimed she did not care about insults toward herself, but she could not bear hearing such things about her mother. The crowd quickly turned against Kiara, calling her terrible for saying those things. Kiara could not believe people were falling for such an old-fashioned act. Richard then declared that he could not marry her, even if their parents had arranged it. He repeated that he was ending the engagement and asked everyone present to witness his decision. Kiara could not believe they had gone so far just to frame her. On top of that, the scene was unfolding at a grand ball hosted by the Felsens, where most of the guests supported Richard. Now that she had lost her place in society, her chance of inheriting the family estate looked grim. Even her own father had turned his back on her. She knew a man so obsessed with appearances would never defend her. She lightly slapped her own cheek, reminding herself that she had already expected this. She was used to standing alone without anyone on her side. Her pride would never allow her to give in to such a pitiful act that felt like a childish school performance. If they wanted a fight, she was more than ready to give them one. Kiara told Richard that she understood his position. She tried to continue speaking, but someone interrupted, saying the conversation was one-sided and unfair. The voice was familiar. When she turned, she saw Prince Cecil. She could hardly believe her eyes. The prince asked Richard why he would publicly humiliate a young woman and act as if he were the victim. He said it was clear they were only trying to destroy Kiara's reputation. Federica quickly argued that she was only revealing her sister's cruelty. Cecil responded that accusing someone without any proof was not revealing the truth at all. It was simply slander. Richard angrily demanded to know who Cecil was, claiming he had no memory of inviting such a rude guest. Cecil calmly said it was understandable since he had not been invited. A friend had secretly brought him in. He then introduced himself as Cecil von Lowenberg. He explained that many might not recognize him because he had been away from the country for some time, but he was the first prince of the kingdom. Gasps filled the room. Richard asked why the prince was even at the ball. Cecil said he had been searching for a woman he was eager to meet. He knew she was a noble lady but did not know her name, so he had been sneaking into every ball he could hoping to find her. And now, at last, he had. With a teasing smile, he looked toward Kiara, who appeared tense and uneasy. He stepped closer and said he had been longing to see her, his dear doctor, and asked if she was Kiara. She tried to act as though she did not know what he was talking about, but Cecil refused to believe her. He reminded her of the trouble he had gone through just to find her. At that moment, Richard stepped in and said the matter was only between the Felsons and the Bellworths. He told Cecil to stay out of it. Cecil could not believe that Richard, after making such a public scene, was now telling someone else to keep quiet. Still, he realized Richard had a point. Even though Cecil was part of the royal family, he was still an outsider and had no real reason to interfere with their family affairs. However, Cecil knew that if he became directly involved, no one could complain. Kiara felt confused when the prince walked toward her. He knelt in front of her and gently took her hand. Kiara froze, unsure how to react as Cecil spoke. He explained that he had spent the last few weeks searching for her and had never forgotten her since the day they first met. Looking straight into her eyes, he asked for her hand in marriage. The crowd was stunned. Richard grew angry and told the prince to stop making such outrageous claims, especially about marrying Kiara. The prince gave him a sharp glare and said he was serious. Turning back to Kiara, he asked for her answer. She struggled to find the right words, but then she noticed the prince quietly mouthing for her to say yes. Without fully realizing it, she said yes. A smile spread across the prince's face as he declared Kiara his fiancée. He then challenged anyone to call him an outsider again. Later, in a separate room, the prince laughed quietly as he remembered the expressions he had seen in the ballroom. He said he had not felt that excited in a long time. Kiara simply nodded while lowering her head. Still, the prince believed Kiara's situation was far worse. She had been betrayed not only by her fiancé but also by her own family. He told her not to worry because he would make sure she could live comfortably. Kiara thanked him for his promise. After the chaos from the broken engagement, Richard was dragged away and Federica and the others hurried back to their estate. Meanwhile, the prince had asked for a private room so he could speak with Kiara, and since then he had been staying at the Felson residence. Kiara could not help but wonder what his real intentions were. At last, Cecil introduced himself formally as the first prince of the kingdom, along with his familiar aide Royce. He mentioned they had already met before. Kiara then introduced herself as the eldest daughter of the Bellworth family and thanked the prince for his earlier help. She also apologized for her rudeness the other day. Cecil told her there was no need to apologize. In fact, he wanted to thank her for saving Cliff's life. Because of her, he had not lost an important subordinate. Kiara replied that she had not done much. She was more interested in hearing how Cliff was doing. Cecil explained that Cliff was resting as a precaution and would soon return to work. Kiara felt relieved. She had only given emergency first aid and a pneumothorax was difficult to treat even with modern medicine. It amazed her that magic could heal it so quickly. Still, her thoughts kept returning to one thing: how the prince had discovered her identity and why he had suddenly proposed. Suddenly, someone barged into the room calling out to the prince. Cecil asked what was wrong. The man then claimed a general named Gerald had been attacked. Cecil immediately ran to the general's estate. An injured man tried to stand and greet the prince, apologizing for the unpleasant scene. Cecil told him not to move and asked what had happened. An attendant explained that a young woman had collapsed near the residence. When Gerald went to help her, she suddenly stabbed him in the abdomen with a dagger. Cecil asked where the woman had gone. The attendant said they had lost sight of her and that her movements had seemed unnatural. Kiara then remembered that this man was General Aubert Gerald, the prince's sword teacher, and an important figure who supported him in politics. In the manga, however, he was killed early in the story, which triggered a major political conspiracy. Cecil asked where the healer was. The attendants replied that the healer was away for the night, but the household staff were searching for one. Kiara could not believe they would leave the general in that condition until help arrived. She decided to act first and check the wound herself. Just then, someone told her not to touch his father. He said they were in the Gerald household and questioned why a woman was wandering around there. An attendant told the young master that Kiara was the prince's guest and reminded him to be polite. That only made the young master more upset. Cecil explained that the young master was Eric, the third son of the general, and that he was training to be a healer. Eric claimed that if the blade was removed from the wound, the pressure it was creating would be gone and the bleeding would become much worse. He turned to Kiara and said amateurs should stand back and stay quiet until a healer arrived. This angered Kiara. She called Eric the real beginner who was acting too proud. She then walked past him, picked up a nearby pair of scissors, and apologized to the general in advance. Without hesitation, she cut the general's clothes. Eric demanded to know what she was doing. Kiara replied sharply that she could not check the wounds properly if the clothes were in the way. She told an attendant to cover the blade with a clean cloth and hold it steady so it would not move. The attendant obeyed without question. Kiara examined the stab wound carefully. The dagger was stuck in the general's left side. There were no signs of irritation inside the abdomen, and the depth of the wound was about 5 to 6 centimeters. The general was still awake and alert, showing no signs of shock. It also did not seem like there was heavy bleeding inside the abdominal cavity, though she could not fully rule out organ damage. The general then asked who Kiara was. She introduced herself and asked him for a favor. She requested permission to remove his lower garments so she could check his condition fully. This surprised everyone, including Eric. He called her shameless and finally lost his patience. He tried to push her away, but Kiara shouted back, telling him to stop pretending to know more than he did. She explained that the general's urinary tract or intestines might be injured, and he could be bleeding inside or passing blood in his urine. She said that as a healer's apprentice, Eric should have at least understood that much. She refused to just stand by and watch. She declared that she would treat the general herself. Kiara's words had left Eric puzzled, and he questioned her about what she meant. She explained that if they simply waited for a healer, it would already be too late. Eric tried to ask her more, but before he could, someone entered the room asking about the commotion. It was a doctor named Dohan who walked in with confidence. Eric quickly told him that his father was in critical condition and moved Kiara aside. He introduced Dohan to his father as a respected authority who taught at the academy. Dohan stepped forward, examined the patient, and tapped the dagger lodged in the wound. The touch made the general groan in pain. Kiara demanded to know what he was doing, but Dohan's assistant stopped her, saying the doctor was about to begin treatment. Dohan muttered a spell, and small glowing orbs appeared around the dagger. He focused his magic into the blade, then pulled it out from the general. The moment the dagger was removed, the wound closed instantly. Eric was relieved to see it fully healed. Kiara leaned in to examine it and confirmed the wound was indeed sealed. She asked the general if he felt any pain or discomfort, and he replied that the sharp pain was gone, as if it had never been there at all. When she touched the spot, the skin felt soft and uninjured, and the general showed no reaction to pressure. Even so, Kiara found it hard to believe that such a serious injury could heal so quickly. Dohan expressed his relief that they had made it in time and wiped his hands with a cloth. However, he warned that there was still a chance the dagger had been poisoned, so the general should rest for a while. He said the general could start eating once there were no further issues, and asked Eric, as an apprentice healer, to monitor his father's condition. The general thanked Dohan for saving his life once again. Dohan replied that it was an honor to help the man who protected the kingdom, then excused himself to treat another patient. 3 days had passed since then, and Kiara was still staying at the Gerald residence. She had no other place to go, so the prince insisted they allow her to remain there despite the uneasy stares from Eric and the maids. Even so, she continued to find healing magic fascinating. The general had already recovered enough to eat solid food again. This made her wonder why the general had died in the manga she remembered. She began to question if her actions were slowly changing how the story unfolded. At that moment, Cecil arrived and mentioned that Kiara looked troubled. She was caught off guard and asked why he had come. Cecil explained that he could not ignore his fiancée. He had even spoken with Kiara's father and brought some of her belongings with him. Kiara was taken aback by how quickly he managed to get things done. She then asked nervously why he was going to such lengths for her and wondered if he truly intended to marry her. Cecil told her not to worry, saying he had no such plans, and explained that the proposal at the ball had only been an excuse to put her former fiancé in his place. Kiara replied that there was no advantage in getting involved with her. The prince disagreed, pointing out that she was like the perfect example of a young noblewoman who had saved his subordinate's life with a medical method he had never seen before. It was impossible not to be curious about her. That was why he had slipped from one high society gathering to another, searching for her. He asked who she really was to possess such unusual knowledge. Kiara claimed she had read about medicine in a book during her childhood. Cecil said he had expected that answer, so he had ordered an investigation of every medical text in the royal capital. They had found records of patients with symptoms similar to pneumothorax, but none contained details about punctures or similar treatments. Moreover, books on human anatomy were not available to the public in the kingdom, and yet, Kiara showed she knew such things. When she performed the procedure, she had first located the ribs, then inserted the instrument at a precise point. Those, Cecil said, were the actions of someone who clearly understood the structure of the human body. Kiara wondered who this prince was to figure out so much just by watching her. That was not something an ordinary onlooker could figure out. Cecil also wanted to know how Kiara even knew about him. He remembered the time when she was gathering tools for the puncture. She had glanced at him and called him Prince. Kiara thought back and wondered if she had really said that while she was busy focusing on the patient. Cecil believed that should have been their very first meeting, yet she already knew who he was. He asked her about it again and kept wondering what kind of person his fiancé truly was. Before Kiara could answer, a shout came from outside the room. They stepped out and saw the general and a maid standing in the hallway. The maid said her master was in pain. Kiara felt an uneasy feeling grow inside her for reasons she could not explain. Cecil quickly ran to the collapsing general and checked if he was all right. The general said that Dohan had healed him earlier, but a sharp pain had suddenly struck again. Cecil ordered someone to find Dohan right away. When Dohan arrived, he confirmed that the wounds were already closed. Eric pointed out that his father seemed to be in much more pain than before. Dohan whispered to his assistant, then explained that something was blocking the general's mana flow. He described it as a condition where mana from an outside source, such as healing magic, caused the body's entire mana circulation to stop. This led to a fast decline in the patient's health. The assistants added that this problem usually happened to people born with low mana, just like the general. They said that if the patient had stronger mana, he would have already healed. Eric repeated that his father was still in pain and guessed that the inner wounds had reopened. The assistants were shocked that an apprentice dared to question the doctor. They insisted it was already a miracle that the general had survived such a wound. Dohan told them to be quiet. He said he had already used several healing spells on the general, and with treatment that complete, it was hard to believe the wound could reopen from the inside. The general then coughed hard, scattering saliva. Disgusted, Dohan pulled back his hand and called him unpleasant. The prince, who had stayed silent until now, finally spoke up and confronted Dohan. The doctor asked who he was. Cecil introduced the prince by his full name, which surprised the doctor. The prince reminded him how important the general was to the country and asked him to do everything possible to help him recover. Dohan looked disappointed for a moment, but soon calmed himself. He told the prince that the general did have mana circulatory disorder, and using more healing spells would only make it worse. He said there was nothing more he could do, and bringing another healer would not change the outcome. The only thing left was to cast a spell to ease the pain and keep watching his condition. In the end, he said it was up to the patient whether he would recover. Kiara could not believe what she had just heard. A doctor had spoken recklessly without even taking the time to properly examine the patient. She wondered if this was really how healers worked, blaming the patient whenever the treatment failed. Dohan also could not believe he was meeting her again. His assistants had told him not to get involved with an amateur. And besides, it was almost time for the bishop's examination. Dohan simply told Eric to cast a spell on his father to ease the pain, and he said he would check on them later. When the healers left, the room fell into a heavy silence. Cecil finally spoke and decided to move the general to the military hospital, believing the military surgeons might be able to do something. Royce suggested going to the royal palace instead, but Cecil pointed out that all the royal physicians were currently serving the queen. Eric asked them to wait. His face already showed resignation after hearing what Dohan had said. He decided to cast a pain relief spell on his father and then asked everyone to leave the room. As he worked the spell, Eric quietly asked his father about the pain. The general said it had eased a little, but he still coughed heavily. This made Eric remember the days when the general was at the academy with him. Back then, students whispered about the general's third son wanting to become a healer. They mocked the idea of a so-called weakling standing among the proud military men of the Gerald family. The general had told his son not to pay attention to such talk, as listening to fools was a waste of time. Eric had said it was fine because he had chosen this path himself. He promised his father he would become a great healer so he could support the family. The general had high expectations for him and believed he could achieve it. But now, standing by his father's side, Eric felt powerless. Despite his skills, he could do nothing to stop the slow decline of the man who had raised him. At that moment, Kiara knocked on the door and asked to come in. Eric chose to ignore her. She then knocked harder, forcing him to open the door. He started to say he did not care if she knew the prince and that he would throw her out, but Kiara walked past him and went straight to the general. She apologized for examining him again. Eric tried to stop her but froze when he saw how serious she looked. Kiara asked the general if the pain was only in the area where he had been stabbed, and he said yes. She pressed the wound slightly, making the general groan in pain. She then asked if he had passed gas recently. The question confused him, so Kiara used a simpler word: fart. Eric became angry at her for asking something so rude. The general admitted he had not. Thinking about it, he realized this might explain his stomach pain and bloating. Kiara said that made sense because his abdomen could be swollen. She explained it was not a problem with mana circulation but most likely a bowel obstruction. When Eric asked what that meant, she explained in simple terms that the intestines were blocked, so nothing could pass through. This caused swelling, pain, and sometimes vomiting. Eric asked why his father would have such a problem. Kiara explained that bowel obstructions were common after abdominal surgery. During healing, the intestines could stick to the abdominal wall or to other tissues, narrowing the passage. This reminded Eric of Dohan's rushed treatment, and he asked if that was the reason his father now had the bowel obstruction. Kiara said it had only been a guess, but she still thought the idea of a mana circulatory disorder was complete nonsense. She admired the part about healing wounds with magic, but blaming the patient for later problems and then running away made her see Dohan as incompetent, dangerous, and almost evil. Eric found it hard to believe since he had never learned about such an illness back at the academy. Still, Kiara pushed for treating the general right away. If it had only been a simple injury, it would have been easy to fix. but she quickly noticed the symptoms were getting worse. She explained that twisted intestines could block blood flow, which would lead to constant and severe stomach pain. She warned that there was a high chance it could happen, and suggested they should consider open abdominal surgery. Eric could not believe what she was saying. He thought the idea was crazy and said he would never allow something so brutal. Kiara, however, was convinced that the general had a bowel obstruction. She explained that if it was left untreated, it could lead to dead tissue in the intestines, cause a serious infection in the stomach area, and in the worst case, cause death. Eric became angry and questioned what someone without magic could possibly know. He instead suggested improving his father's mana flow to ease the pain. Kiara told him to look closely at the patient, insisting that such a condition could not be fixed just by easing pain. She made it clear that ignoring the real problem would be dangerous. Defeated in the argument, Eric wondered who could even perform such a strange and risky surgery, since he had never heard of cutting open a stomach before. Kiara tied up her hair, determined to save the general no matter what. At that moment, Cecil walked into the room carrying a suitcase and a bag. He said he had brought most of the tools Kiara had asked for. Kiara was surprised at how quickly he returned and thought it must have been hard to find everything. Cecil explained that he had a few connections. He could not get all the items exactly as requested, but he managed to gather similar tools and blades that he could find. Kiara thanked him, then turned to the general. She reminded him about what she had explained earlier about his condition. She said his health would not improve unless they opened his abdomen and untwisted his intestines. She looked at him seriously and asked him to trust her with his body. The general did not hesitate to believe in her and the prince, placing his life in her hands. Meanwhile, someone received a report that the general had a mana circulatory disorder. Dohan confirmed the report and believed the general would die within a few days. Thinking this was urgent news, he decided to come in person. The woman holding a fan asked if Dohan was sure this was the right time for formal greetings when someone was near death. She worried that his reputation would suffer if the general died. Dohan said the healing process had been perfect, so there was no reason to blame him. He added that such problems only happened when weak people tried to get treatment meant for those above their rank. More importantly, he wanted to share that the first Prince Cecil had been staying at the general's residence. He noticed how desperate the prince seemed. If the general died, Cecil would lose one of his strongest supporters for the throne. Dohan claimed the general's death would affect the struggle for the throne. The woman agreed that this was indeed interesting news. When she heard that the stubborn old general had survived the assassination attempt, she cursed the healer who treated him. Still, she could see that Dohan had potential. Dohan said he was honored. He then shared that his family had served as court physicians for generations, and that he would be grateful if he could receive her support. He addressed her as the Queen, Her Majesty. Back at the Gerald's estate, an attendant told Kiara that the room had been cleaned. Kiara thanked the attendant and asked about the tools. The attendant explained that they had boiled the tools in pots, then asked how much distilled water should be prepared. Kiara told them to make as much as possible and to collect plenty of clean unused cloth. She also decided it was time to get ready. Just then, Cecil arrived and handed her a bottle of ether. Kiara had not expected ether to exist in this world. Although it carried serious risks, it meant she could give the patient a general anesthetic. She thanked Cecil and asked where he had found it, but he only replied that he would rather not say it out loud. Kiara understood and did not press further. She then asked him to find someone who was familiar with blood and organs to help her. Before Cecil could leave, Eric stepped forward and asked them to wait. Kiara said she had no time to argue, but Eric told her he was not there to stop her. He explained that he intended to follow his father's wishes, though that did not mean he already trusted her. He then offered to help with the surgery. Soon after, Kiara, Cecil, and Eric entered the general's room. The general was asleep, breathing steadily after receiving the anesthetic. Kiara had never thought she would use ether for this purpose, since it was rarely used in modern medicine. Eric then mentioned that in the eastern medical city of Ascendia, ether was given to patients to put them to sleep before removing teeth. He wondered if Kiara had any connection to Ascendia. Once all the preparations were done, Kiara told the two men to change their clothes. Eric wore a modern Earth-style surgeon's outfit and asked if it was really necessary since it felt tight and uncomfortable. Kiara explained it was to prevent infection. She also warned him to follow her instructions during the surgery, and if he got in the way or contaminated the surgical area, she would make him leave the room. Eric agreed without arguing. Kiara had tools she would never see in the modern world, yet sterilization was not complete, and she could not find any rubber gloves. At this point, it was almost the same as operating with bare hands. Even so, she was the only one present who could perform this kind of surgery. After steadying her breathing, Kiara began the operation. She used a scalpel to cut the skin. Eric noticed there was no hesitation in her movements. He watched as she widened the incision by cutting the abdominal aponeurosis, allowing her to open the abdomen without slicing through the muscle itself. Since there was no bleeding, Eric realized Kiara truly knew what she was doing. She announced that she had reached the peritoneum and would open it to reach the abdominal cavity. Eric was surprised at how quickly she worked. Kiara asked him to lift the peritoneum while she cut it, making sure the organs underneath were safe. She showed him how to hold the thin membrane, but the sight of his father's insides nearly made him feel sick. Kiara told him to step outside if he could not handle it. Eric replied that he was just startled and could still continue. This was the first time he had ever seen the inside of a human body. Although he had studied anatomy in lectures, this was nothing like the drawings in books. As Kiara expected, a section of the small intestines was swollen, and there were thick adhesions around the stab wound. Eric asked what he should do. Kiara explained that she would first separate the adhesions to release the intestinal blockage, then check the tract for damage. If any part was torn or dying, she would remove that section. Eric understood that meant cutting out part of the intestines. Kiara hoped it would not come to that. She told him to lift the abdominal wall so he could see her work and asked the prince to adjust the lighting. From her view, the adhesions were not too widespread and the digestive tract did not seem to be torn. She felt confident she could handle it. Eric and Cecil quietly watched her work while the general remained peacefully asleep. Afterward, Kiara confirmed that the adhesions had been separated and the blood flow to the intestine was good. She decided they could avoid removing any part of it. Eric asked if the surgery was over, and Kiara said it was. Once they cleaned the area, they would close the cut. However, she warned him not to relax yet, since there was still a high risk of problems after surgery, such as infection. She and Eric planned to take turns watching the general's recovery for a while. Eric agreed, and the two of them continued closing the incision. At one point, Eric completely forgot that the patient on the table was his own father. Instead, he found himself wondering who Kiara really was. Several weeks after the general's surgery in the palace, the king had just approved the rebuilding of Gloucester Church for a group of men. Soon after, the queen entered and noticed how tired he looked. She suggested that he rest for a while. The king said resting was not an option because many problems had piled up, and he had fallen behind on his duties. He also mentioned hearing that the general's condition had been critical. On top of that, he heard that his son Cecil had been chasing after some young woman. The king wondered where he had gone wrong in raising him. The queen told him not to blame the prince, explaining that Cecil avoided the palace because of her. She said that after the late queen died and she quickly took her place, Cecil had hated her. In his eyes, she had stolen his mother's role. The king told her not to blame herself, saying she had done well as both a mother and a queen. He hoped Cecil would one day understand that. The queen thanked him for his kindness, then changed the topic. She said there was something she wanted to discuss and explained that she had recently found a very skilled healer who was waiting outside to be introduced. Outside the door, Dohan was already celebrating in his mind. He believed he was about to become a royal court physician. He imagined the wealth and honor he would soon enjoy, and he felt relieved that he would no longer have to treat patients who were barely clinging to life. Just then, someone familiar walked past Dohan. It was General Aubergerald. Dohan felt confused when the general entered the room and greeted the king. The king looked happy to see him alive and well. The queen was surprised because she believed the general had been on his deathbed. Aubert explained that although healing magic had closed his wound, his condition had only worsened afterward. He said the healer abandoned him, claiming he had a mana circulation disorder. Aubert added that it was thanks to the physician recommended by the prince that he managed to survive. The king was shocked because mana circulation disorder had no known cure. Aubert went on to reveal that he actually had an illness called ileus, an intestinal blockage, which the doctor quickly diagnosed and treated properly. Dohan was even more surprised as the general had never recovered despite all the magic he had used on him. Aubert said he would soon return to his duties and had only come today to report that he was now in good health. The king called him dutiful and was glad to see him safe. Aubert then left, but not before quietly greeting Dohan outside the room. The king asked the queen where the healer was. The queen replied that the healer had another appointment and that they could make introductions on another day. In her thoughts, the queen cursed Cecil for hiding and twisting the truth about the general's condition. After seeing how the prince acted, the queen decided not to hold back anymore. No matter what Cecil did, she believed the throne belonged to her son, the second prince. Meanwhile, Kiara had been reading books about human anatomy. She could not believe that these materials were actually being taught in the academy. The lessons were too simple and filled with mistakes. The fact that ether was used as an anesthetic showed that this world's civilization was similar to the 19th century. Even so, their understanding of anatomy was shockingly poor. Cecil eventually found her and asked if she could spare a moment. They walked to the garden together. The prince thanked her sincerely for everything she had done for him, saying he no longer knew how to repay her. Kiara said she only did what was necessary, and that the general's own strength played a big part in his recovery. Normally, surgery like that carried the risk of infection, but the general's healing went so well that it could be called a stroke of luck. Cecil believed the general would have died if not for Kiara, since the false diagnosis of a mana circulation disorder would have gone unchallenged. Kiara called the term ridiculous and said it sounded like something invented by incompetent people to protect themselves. She asked with anger if such foolish behavior was really to be allowed. Cecil asked Kiara if she knew that their kingdom had grown into a powerful nation because of the progress in magic. Over time, only people with strong magic power were given special privileges. He explained that if those who gained benefits just for having magic stayed at the center of the country, certain outcomes were bound to happen. Kiara understood what he meant. Cecil confirmed that to protect their authority, the rulers had erased any knowledge or technology that did not require magic. Because of this, any treatment other than healing magic was seen as strange, and patients who could not be cured with magic were labeled as having a magic circulation disorder. This made Kiara realize why the anatomy textbook was so disorganized. At that moment, Cecil had just witnessed Kiara save 2 lives without using any magic. Kiara said it was only a coincidence, but Cecil told her not to pretend otherwise. He already knew she had knowledge far beyond their time. He warned that the country would collapse if it kept rejecting new ideas, and before that could happen, he wanted to destroy its corrupt system. He asked Kiara to lend him her strength. Kiara did not know what to say. She did not even understand why she had become Kiara in the first place. Yet now she found herself involved in something far bigger than she had ever imagined. She only wanted one thing. She clenched her teeth and admitted that she had medical knowledge, but she explained that this knowledge could not be applied without technology that was far more advanced than what was available in this era. If a patient collapsed in front of her without the right tools and facilities, she would be nothing more than a helpless bystander, and she could not accept that. She said there was nothing she hated more than being powerless when a patient's life was at stake. Because of this, she asked the prince to promise that he would create an environment where her skills could truly be used. If he did that, she would help him without hesitation, even if it meant tearing the nation apart. Cecil was surprised for a moment, but then smiled. He said they had an agreement and told Kiara that he was counting on her, his doctor. Afterward, Royce was shocked when he found out they were about to witness a human dissection. He could not believe this was the reason the prince had gone out with Kiara. He thought it was insane. Kiara told him to be quiet and asked why dissection was such a big deal. Royce explained that it meant cutting up a dead person's body, and the church had always taught them that harming the flesh was the work of the devil. Kiara understood why people in that time were disgusted by the idea. After deciding to work together with the prince, Kiara revealed her secret to him in an unexpected way. She explained that she had the memories of being a doctor from far in the future. Surprisingly, the prince thought it made sense. Kiara was taken aback that he believed her so quickly, but Cecil said he had no reason to doubt her. He then asked what they should do next. Wanting to improve the kingdom's medical system, he wondered if Kiara had something specific in mind. Without hesitation, Kiara asked if she could attend a human dissection. Cecil was puzzled, since she already knew human anatomy. Kiara explained that while she had studied it, all her knowledge came from her original world. In her future world, magic did not exist, and naturally neither did the idea of magical power. But in this world, magic was real, and people had different levels of magical energy. This could mean their bodies might be very different from the ones she had studied before. Cecil realized her knowledge might not fully apply if the body structures here were not the same. Kiara agreed, adding that before anything else, they needed to spread the right understanding of the human body among local healers. Eventually, she believed they could create a proper anatomy textbook for practical use. Cecil was startled by the idea at first, but then agreed. He said he might have a lead on how to start and promised to look into it. Kiara did not know what kind of lead it was, but she had already decided to become a doctor, so she was willing to do whatever she could. Royce reminded the prince that human dissection was forbidden in their country, which came as a surprise to Kiara. Cecil agreed and explained that only healers were allowed to perform dissections, and even then, only the highest-ranking ones had access to the more detailed anatomy books. Still, there was one other job besides healers that was allowed to do dissections. Royce already understood what the prince meant. Cecil explained that executioners, the people who carried out death sentences, were allowed to dissect the bodies of those who had been condemned. This was done to help them perform their work more accurately. The man they were going to visit was Jean Chambel, a famous executioner once feared as the Lord of Death. Cecil had heard that Jean's nephew had taken over his position while Jean retired, but Jean could still give them valuable help. Royce objected, saying the Chambel family was a lowly clan that made money from executions and torture. Cecil told him to relax, pointing out that the role of an executioner was officially given by the king to carry out the kingdom's death sentences. Kiara felt like she had heard the name Chambel before. Cecil noticed her reaction and asked what was wrong, wondering if she was also against meeting the executioners. Kiara said that was not the case. She explained that if they truly wanted to improve the kingdom's medical system, they could not afford to be too choosy about their methods. Cecil was pleased to hear her say that. Even so, Kiara had an uneasy feeling and wondered if everything would really turn out fine. The trio soon reached the Chambel estate. Royce trembled when he saw the dark manor, but to Kiara it looked grand and impressive. A man came out to greet Cecil. He was an old man who bowed deeply to show respect to the royal prince. Royce thought the man looked intimidating. Cecil asked how he had been, and the old man introduced himself as Jean Chambel. Jean said he was honored to meet the prince and also greeted the rest of the group. Cecil thanked him for the warm welcome, then noticed someone standing behind Jean. He asked if that person was part of the household. Kiara turned to see who it was and froze. She recognized the man instantly. He had a lonely expression and was none other than Francis Chambel, a major character from the story she knew. In the story, there had been a time when Kiara was about to be attacked by thugs hired by a rival faction. At the last moment, the cold-hearted executioner Francis saved her. Afterward, he pushed her away, warning that she would be cursed if she stayed near him. Still, Kiara wanted to thank him, so she visited him again and again. As they spent more time together, Francis slowly developed feelings for her. But Kiara was already in love with the prince. That did not matter to Francis. Even if he could not have her, he wanted to protect her. In secret, he began killing the people who wished her harm. With each life he took, his hands became bloodier, and his mind began to crumble. He swore that anything or anyone that hurt Kiara would die by his hands. Kiara remembered this part of the story well. The manga had started as a romance, but it turned into a horror tale the moment Francis appeared. To think she would actually meet such a dangerous person in real life. Jean introduced Francis as his grandson. Francis silently bowed in greeting. Cecil was surprised, since he had heard that Jean had no heir, and had given the position of executioner to his nephew instead. Jean only said that there were special circumstances, and suggested that they all go inside first. As they sat down to talk, Jean asked why they had come to his home, and why they had brought a young woman with them. Cecil said he had only one request. He wanted Kiara to attend a human dissection performed by the Chambel family. Jean asked if the young woman in front of him was the one. He could tell they were serious, but he wanted to know the reason. Cecil explained that it was for the progress of medicine in the country. He planned to change the medical system with Kiara's help, and as the first step, he wanted to create an accurate anatomy textbook. Jean began to respond, but before he could say much, someone called out his name from outside. When he went to check, he found two young siblings, Bill and Liza. He asked what was wrong. Liza quickly said her brother's arm was hurt and asked if they could take a look. Jean told Francis to examine it. Francis checked the arm and saw it was swollen. He asked Bill to move his wrist. Bill said he could, but it hurt a lot. Kiara noticed the swelling but saw no obvious deformity. She thought it might be a distal radius fracture, but without an x-ray, she could not be sure. Francis asked how it happened. Bill claimed his hand got stuck between pieces of lumber. However, Francis knew this kind of injury did not usually come from that. Fractures near the wrist were often caused by falling on an outstretched hand. He asked again what had really happened. Liza finally admitted that Ralph, the farmer's son, had pushed her brother. Bill had been trying to protect her after Ralph tried to drag her into the barn. Jean, worried, asked if Liza was unharmed. Liza said her brother had saved her in time. Bill then pleaded with them not to tell anyone, explaining that if rumors spread about what happened, Liza might never be able to marry. Jean promised to keep it a secret and said the most important thing was to focus on Bill's injury. Kiara and Royce realized then that Jean was a truly kind man. Francis diagnosed the injury as a radial fracture. The symptoms were mild, but if the broken bone was not set back in its proper position, Bill could lose the movement in his wrist. He explained that the procedure would be painful and asked Bill if he could handle it. Bill said he could. Francis then called for his grandfather's help. Kiara had been right. These people might have been executioners, but they also had medical knowledge. After the siblings left, Kiara found the Chambels impressive and asked how they had learned medicine. Jean explained that their family had worked as physicians while also serving as executioners. Over time, they had used the knowledge they gained from dissecting criminals to create their own special medical practice. Kiara noted that their treatment method clearly came from a deep understanding of anatomy. Jean felt humbled by her words and asked for her name. Kiara introduced herself as a surgeon and said she had come to learn the correct details of anatomy and share that knowledge with others. She then formally asked Jean to lend her their help. Just then, Francis spoke up and asked what use the knowledge Kiara mentioned really had. Kiara was confused because he had just treated the boy a moment ago. Francis explained that a fracture could heal in a single day with healing magic. He said that only those who could not afford a healer, usually the poor, were grateful for such old methods. He then turned to Cecil and praised his grand speech about the kingdom's medical progress. Still, he questioned whether Cecil truly cared for the kingdom if he was not working to create a place where every citizen could receive equal treatment. Jean tried to scold his grandson, but Cecil stopped him, saying that Francis's opinion had some truth. Francis then pointed out that their family had long been known as a clan of executioners. When they walked through town, people saw them as signs of misfortune, and they were not even allowed to shop there. Their special medicine had been developed only because they could not rely on doctors and had to cure illnesses on their own. In the end, he believed their medicine would become useless once healing magic gained proper recognition. He calmly suggested abandoning the ideas being discussed and instead returning to the royal capital. Jean then addressed the prince and apologized for his grandson's rude behavior. He promised to take full responsibility and asked for forgiveness. Cecil replied that he was not upset. What mattered more to him was learning the story behind Francis's attitude. Jean said it might be better to call it destiny rather than a simple story. He explained that his grandson had not become this way without a reason, and in a sense, it was an inevitable path. Meanwhile, Liza asked if her brother was really okay. Bill admitted that the treatment had hurt a lot, but he felt much better now compared to before. Liza felt guilty because she had not accepted Ralph's proposal earlier. Bill told her he would never allow his sister to marry someone like that. A group of children soon showed up nearby. Among them was Ralph, the very person the siblings had just been talking about. The children asked if Bill's injured arm was healing well. Bill recognized Ralph and became angry, thinking he had come to bother his sister again. Ralph said he was no longer interested in Liza and that he had business with Bill this time. He handed Bill a piece of paper with numbers written on it. Ralph explained that his nose still hurt from when Bill had punched him, which worried his mother. She had hired a town healer to cast a healing spell on him. Since Bill had caused the injury, Ralph said it was only right for him to pay the full cost of the treatment. Liza argued that it was unfair because her brother had only been protecting her. She thought demanding payment for that was completely unreasonable. Ralph replied that they could explain their side to the town council as he had already reported what happened. If they wanted, they could even shout in public, just as Liza had done when she thought Ralph and his friends were attacking her. This made Bill furious and he tried to fight back, but his injuries made it easy for Ralph and his friends to overpower him. Ralph then kicked Bill's injured arm, making the pain worse. Liza begged them to stop. Ralph warned them that this was what happened when poor people acted out of place, and he reminded them to pay the bill. Liza turned to check on her brother, but all Bill could say was that Ralph and his friends would pay for what they had done.